Hi, it's me again. Just taking a moment to say hello. It's been a couple days since I posted a video. And I know that some of you who watch my videos are family members and friends who know me and you know my story, but some of you are also strangers. I know some fellow micro preemie moms have read some of my videos, so you are you don't really know too much about my pregnancies. And I know I've mentioned, especially in my most recent video before this, about giving up on breastfeeding. I was talking about my history with suffering from PTSD because of pregnancy situations that I've had in the past with delivering babies with issues and stuff. But some of you know me now, but you didn't know me at the time when those things happened. And some of you did know me, but maybe not really well, and you don't really know exactly what happened, or maybe you forgot. So I do have another video about my little miracle boy. If you want to watch that one, I think it's called My Miracle Boy. But that's my story of Caleb. And again, it's very superficial. I mean, it is a long video. I think it's, I don't know, 15 minutes or something like that. But the story is so long and detailed. I am writing a book. Again, I've mentioned this in other videos. I've been writing a book about my pregnancy issues, delivering babies with special needs, being the mother of a special needs son, literally the miraculous things that have happened to me. And they are, like I said, like with Caleb especially, and with my micro preemie. For her, it's a miracle that either of us are alive, especially her. And it's not just that she was born early, but there's some other underlying reasons. So the book will talk about that, and then also Caleb. He's a little miracle because the prognosis that we receive for him is nothing like what he is. So if you're interested, subscribe so I can tell you when the book is ready, when it's published, so you can check it out if you're interested. But anyway, that being said, so I have that video about Caleb, and then I talk a lot about my micro preemie that I have right now. I know I shared my story in one of my videos about my placenta previa pregnancy, which is why she ended up being born so early, but it wasn't just placenta previa, it was placenta previa and other complications. But I did not share about my other baby who was born with brain issues. So this video, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Again, the details are going to be in the book, so if you want the whole story, very interesting things that happened, check that out. Subscribe so you can read that when it comes out. But anyway, for now, in a little small short story version, Avila, that's my 2-year-old. So she was born in 2016, and my pregnancy after Caleb, he was my third pregnancy, and because of his issues with his brain, after him, it became routine for me to have like a level 2 ultrasound at 20 weeks, and for them to do fetal DNA screening and things like that routinely for my pregnancies, because we weren't really sure why what happened with him happened. And they wanted to know, if it was going to happen again. I'm extremely pro-life. I would never choose to terminate a pregnancy because my baby had issues, but I do the testing because I want to know. I want to know because it's important to me that I deliver at the right hospital. If they're going to need help right upon birth, that, they'll be in a place where they can get the help they're going to need. And not just like at my local community hospital. I normally work with a midwife. There's no level 3 NICU at that hospital. It's a community hospital. My midwife is capable of, she's great with delivery, but she can't do a C-section. They can't really care for a baby that has like a lot of issues or very premature at that hospital. So I would want to know if what I was facing and choose my care and my hospital accordingly. Also have time to prepare myself mentally. With Caleb, I'm very grateful that I knew about what was happening with him before, because it gave me a lot of time to prepare myself, just emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially prepare as best I could, and my family as well, um, to have this special baby. So that being said, my next baby after Caleb, actually my next pregnancy after Caleb, I did lose. It was a 15-week miscarriage. We'll get to that another day. But the pregnancy after that resulted in a full-term baby. Normal 20-week ultrasound, and then he's 5 years old now, and there's nothing. The birth was a 2-hour labor, fast birth. I mean, perfect, healthy, like no issues at all. And then the pregnancy after him, so my 6th pregnancy, because I lost one before Caleb as well, and my oldest is a surviving healthy pregnancy, healthy child. So 6th pregnancy is with Avila. Like I said, she was born in 2016. Her 20-week ultrasound, level 2, normal. They were like, she looks great, growing great. There's no problems, no brain issues, no nothing. Nothing was wrong with her. Completely healthy. The pregnancy was healthy. I felt good. I was working out the whole time. Everything was good. And so I delivered her, and she looked fine. She was 9 pounds, 11 ounces. I grow big babies, by the way. So she was 9 pounds, 11 ounces, and a week early, and still that big. Her APGARs were fine. I put her to breast right away after she was born. She latched on. She breastfed for a little while. She was acting like a normal baby. And so, I was with the midwife at the community hospital. Nobody figured anything was wrong. And then she was 2.5 hours old, and I was holding her, and suddenly she just gasped, and she kind of like rolled her eyes back. She didn't shake or anything, but she just kind of took this big breath and then held her breath, and she kind of rolled her eyes back, and she turned blue. She wasn't breathing. She just like took a big breath and held her breath. And so we called in the nurses. We were frantic, obviously. And we're like, the baby's not breathing, And so they came in, and by the time they came in, she was kind of starting to like breathe a little bit. Like they tapped on her and she like took a breath, but it lasted probably about a minute, I would have to guess. And then she kind of turned a little pink again and like looked like a normal baby. But the nurses did see her blue, because when they came in, she was already kind of looking mottled and kind of blue, And so they were like, oh, okay, well, she's going to go to the nursery overnight, because normally babies room in with the mom. But they were like, we're going to take her in there for observation. Sometimes babies do weird things. There could be some fluid in her lungs, so they were going to do a lung x-ray. They were like, there could be some other things. We'll check check her out and keep an eye on her. So I was told, I was still in labor and delivery. I was told I would get moved to my postpartum room, and then they would bring me in to nurse her and to see her overnight. They were going to keep her in there overnight. So that was what I thought was going to be the plan. And I wasn't allowing myself to get really worked up. I mean, I was a little nervous about it, but they really I was really tired, and they really were like, she's going to be fine. Like they were blowing it off basically. So I really was just like, okay, whatever. I'll see her in a few hours, and I'll nurse her again or whatever before I go to bed. Because she was delivered at 8:30 at night. So this happened at like 11 o'clock. And so then a few hours go by, and I had been moved to my other room, and I told the nurse I want to go see my baby. And they were like, well, we have to talk to the doctors and make sure that she's not getting her x-ray or whatever. And we'll let you know if, it's time to come in. And so basically for hours after that, I had been like given the runaround. Like nurses would come in. They were really busy. So it was like a different nurse or a nurse's assistant, like a CNA would come in, and I was like, hey, I want to see my baby. And they'd be like, oh, let me go check and see if you can. And then they would never come back. And then it would be a different nurse. And I would call people in there. So random nurses were coming in, because I was like pressing my call button. And they were like, oh, everybody was like, oh, I'm going to go check and see what's going on and see if you can come and see her. So after hours, like I said, it was like, I don't know, 2:30 in the morning, and I still had not seen her. And they took her at 11 o'clock. And I was mad. I had like 4 different nurses or CNAs check on her and never came back. And then finally I called my nurse in, and I sat up. I was on the edge of my bed, and I had my flip-flops on, and I'm like, listen, I am going to that nursery to see my baby. I'm going. She's like, well, I need to call and ask. And I'm like, no, you're not going to call and ask. You're going to take me over there, because this is my baby and I'm tired and I haven't breastfed her. She's brand new. I haven't nursed her in like 4 hours. I need to do it. Like, I need to see my baby and I need to go to sleep. And so she was like, I promise you, I'm going to come back. I have to go talk to them. I can't just bring you in there. So she did go and she did come back. And then she said that episode that had happened to my baby had happened 3 more times. And she said, I can't tell you the details, but I can tell you that the doctors haven't been able to come talk to you because they are still trying to stabilize her. And that's when I realized it was really bad, really serious. And I was very scared and I just lost it. I was so upset. And so she said, they're going to come talk to you as soon as they can. And so, like, my husband was sleeping and I woke him up and I'm like crying. And he's like, what's going on? And I told him, and, like 10 minutes later, the doctors came in and they're like, we don't have a level 3 NICU. So all we can tell you is that we think these are seizures. They appear to be seizures, but we don't know for sure because we don't have the equipment to do an EEG on a neonate. So we have to transfer her out. And I'm like, transfer her? You mean like to another hospital? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, where is she going? And they said she was going to this children's hospital. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. She's going to a children's hospital and I just had a baby. So that means I can't go with her, right? And they're like, no, you can't. And let me just tell you, having a baby and being told when your baby is like 6 hours old that they're going to take your baby somewhere else away from you and you can't even say goodbye. That's traumatizing. It was horrible. It was a terrible experience. And it was just so hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that she was leaving. And they were like, well, we can bring her in to say goodbye on the way out, but we already called a transport team and we have to do this now. And like as soon as possible. So all these paramedic crew came in to like get me to sign papers to release her to this other hospital. And my husband, I was like, you're going with her. Like, she's not going by herself. And so he left. And so here it was like, 4:00 in the morning. I hadn't slept in like almost 24 hours. It's been like 22 hours since I'd been awake. And suddenly my baby was gone and my husband was gone and I was by myself. Like, I was just by myself. It was so horrible. It was just awful. And I didn't know if I would ever see her alive again. I was like, I don't know what's happening to her. And they told me, and when they brought her in, they said they'd be able to bring her in to say goodbye. But she was in this little isolette and they had to intubate her because these episodes, these seizures, it turns out they were seizures, were lasting longer and longer each one. And she was holding her breath every time. And the last one was 5 minutes and they had to intubate her because she wasn't breathing. So she was strapped down and had this breathing tube in, was in this little isolette. I just could only put my hand through this little hole. I couldn't kiss her or anything. And like I said, that wasn't what I pictured when they said they would bring her to say goodbye. And I didn't know why she was having these episodes. And we didn't know for sure that they were seizures or what was going on. So she left and I was beside myself. And a couple hours later, I get this call from my husband and he said they did a scan on her brain. And it turns out that she had a brain bleed in her left temporal lobe. And as this unraveled and more testing was done, they discovered that she had had a stroke. And the stroke caused this brain bleed in her left temporal lobe. And that area of the brain responds by seizing. Usually, if there's any bleeding, it's very sensitive to blood. And these seizures were so powerful, her brain was just freaking out, basically, that after they got her to that hospital, she was just having like one right after the other. And they gave her seizure meds. So there's 2 different seizure meds that are okay for babies. One is Keppra and one is phenobarb. And they had given her the maximum dose of both of those meds, and she was still having about 3 an hour. And this is like like she was less than 24 hours old, and I wasn't there. And so they said that there was nothing else they could do because the seizures could cause, if they let the seizures keep happening, if they couldn't control them with meds, they would cause long-term brain damage, irreversible brain damage. So they were like, we have to stop them somehow. She wasn't holding her breath anymore because the ventilator was forcing her to breathe, but she would have been holding her breath every time she had a seizure, but the seizure activity in and of itself is damaging to the brain. So they had no other choice but to put her on this very powerful medication. It's called midazolam. I think the brand name is called Versed, but basically it's a extremely heavy sedative, to the point where it shuts down the whole body. It's like kind of like a coma. Like literally, like you're in such a deep sedation. You don't have any like control over your bodily functions. Like she wouldn't breathe on her own. So they had to keep her on the ventilator, obviously. But the midazolam was actually successful in shutting down those seizures. So that was the only thing that stopped them. Thank God, my midwife, she came in very early the next morning and said, I can't believe you're still here. And I said, what do you mean? And she's like, I thought you would have walked out of here on your own. And I'm like, well, if you don't release me, I'm gonna. She's like, I know you can't rest here, but listen, like you just had a baby, you lost a lot of blood. You you need to take care of yourself, but I know you're not going to rest here and I know you're not going to stay here, so I'm going to release you. So it was less than 24 hours after I had my baby. I had her at 8 p.m. or 8:30 p.m. and my midwife released me at around 10 a.m. the next day. So my parents came, picked me up, they took me home. I packed a bunch of stuff and I went in the car and drove, my parents drove me to Chicago, and I saw my baby. She was, almost a day old by then. And she had just been put on this midazolam and she was just completely out. I'm going to try to post some pictures on my Facebook if you want to join my I Am Every Woman Facebook page. I'm going to post pictures of her like in the hospital. You can see, but when I came and saw her, her head was all wrapped in gauze. She had an EEG hooked up. She had her ventilator on. She had, 2 different IV ports. Because she had one with antibiotics running through it and one with IV nutrition running through it. And the medication. She had all these monitors on her. I mean, it was really bad. It was terrible the way she looked. And here it is, like, here's your baby. But she ended up, the doctors told me that they had to leave her on that midazolam for a few days. They were like, usually the brain freaks out when there's some bleeding. Thank God it clotted quickly and it was a very small amount. But they said usually the brain freaks out for a couple days and then everything kind of cools off and then things are better. So thank God they were able to get the seizures to stop. She was born on a Monday night. She was put on the midazolam medication on Tuesday late afternoon, and within hours, her seizures had stopped. And then they didn't wean her off the midazolam until they started weaning her on Thursday night, so a couple days later. And then she didn't open her eyes even until Friday. And even on Friday, she would like open her eyes for like a couple seconds and then kind of close them again. She was real out of it. She was still on the ventilator. But she did not, the seizures did not return when they took her off that medication. And then by Saturday, she was a little more awake. So then they extubated her. They took out that breathing tube. And then she needed an oxygen cannula. She was real like inflamed and raspy in her throat. And then by Sunday, they said, all right, you can attempt to feed her. She had an NG tube in her nose. They were giving her my milk. And then, so Sunday, they were like, you can try to feed her. But listen, this baby's been like out for, she's almost a week old now. And that's not a good time to teach a baby how to nurse. So what if she nursed one time before all this happened? That's not enough to like get a baby proficient in nursing. So they were like, she can't go home until she's acting like a normal baby. She can't have seizures. She has to be eating, peeing, pooping, growing, all that stuff. So they were like, that can take weeks, just so you know. And I was like, no, she can't stay here for that long, It was awful. Thank God for Ronald McDonald Charities, because they gave me a place to stay and I didn't leave that hospital. I stayed at the hospital with her the whole time. So my kids came to visit me a couple times, but I was with the baby the whole time. And so that Sunday I was like, all right, I'm going to try to nurse her. I really want to nurse her. I really want her to grow and eat and so she can go home. And amazingly enough, the first time I offered her the breast, she took it. She took it and she nursed, and they still gave her something through an NG just to be safe for a couple feeds. And then by the end of the day, she was nursing well enough. They were like, oh, they weighed her before and after, and they were like, yeah, she's peeing and she's pooping and whatever. She's like getting something. So, okay. So I just breastfed her, and that was Sunday. So Monday, Tuesday, they ran another EEG. They did some other testing. She was doing okay. And then Tuesday, they were like, you know what? Let's do the car seat test, and she could probably go home, And so on Wednesday, she went home. So she was there on her 9th day of life. She went home. And she went home on Keppra for seizures, and she was on that for about 3 months. Never had any signs of seizures at home. Never had any feeding issues. And when she was about 3 months old, she had a follow-up EEG, and there was nothing on it abnormal. And they said, all right, let's wean her off the Keppra and see what happens. And I was terrified, but I did it. I weaned her. No seizures. And now my little Avila is 2 years old. She has no deficits. She has never shown any signs of any sort of physical issues. That temporal lobe is a speech area. Doesn't seem to have any problems with speech. She's very bright. She's almost what I would consider advanced. Not that I'm bragging, but compared to like my other babies and like what other kids are normally like at 2 years old. She's like really doing well with potty training already. She speaks. You can understand her. I mean, she's like, you would never know any of this ever happened to her. So that's my story of Avila. Now, obviously, like I said, there's a lot of other like little details that will be in the book. So if you're interested in hearing the details, subscribe so I can tell you when that book comes out. Being that I have 5 children, it's going to be a little while before the book's ready. But I promise you it's going to be worth the wait. So for any of you who maybe like your kid is unfortunately in the NICU, or you've had any experiences like this, just hang in there. I mean, it's not always the same for everyone. Like what happened to her, it doesn't happen to everyone, and the outcome is not always the same. Some of these babies go home and they are on seizure meds for life even. Sometimes they do have seizures, and sometimes they do have some deficits, but you know what? Everything in the end happens for a reason, and I absolutely believe that these things that have happened to me have changed me for the better. Sure, they've caused PTSD and some depression, but you know what? In the long run, it's gotten me somewhere in life, everywhere really. So hang in there. I will pray for you. And thanks for listening to my story. I'll talk to you later. Bye.